Now finally, let's look at classes. So classes in Python are simply okay. So Python is an object-oriented programming language. It's a basic. What does object-oriented programming means? Basically, object-oriented programming is simply a programming concept or types of programming languages that represents everything in objects and classes. So you can think of classes as families of related things. You can think of classes as families, right? You can think of them as being related or having similar characteristics. And then an object is an instance of that class. So you can think of it as a member of the family. I hope that makes sense. So let's try and model something. Let's say we wanted to model a student. So you can say a student, obviously a student, what does a student have? A student has a name, a student has a class or a grade. Let's call it a grade, not to be confusing. And then a student has an age, right? And then what can a student do? A student can go to class, a student can read, and a student can take an exam. So this is something we can model in Python using classes. So we can say that a student is a class because a student is like a broad term, like a family name of like people can be students. It's something that a lot of people can be. I can be a student in one department or in one class. You could be a student in another class. We are all still just students. So we are all members of that class called student. So we can model this in Python, but first, what is the basic syntax for a class? So a class, if you want to instantiate it, you just do class, then you have the class name, then brackets. Then under that, you just add your attributes and your methods. What are attributes and methods? We'll get to that, don't worry. So let's look at this analogy of a student. So what does the student possess inherently? What should every student have? Name, grade, age. Of course, you could have more depending on your use case or what you want it to be, but yeah, for me, this is what every student should have at the very least. So in Python, we call these attributes. Attributes are things that it possesses. Okay, these are things that are unique to everybody, every student. Even though you are a student, everything here is unique to you or should be unique to you. Of course, two students could have the same name, but it should be unique, right? And then what the student can do, what every single student can do, things that they can execute, we call them methods. So methods are functions basically, but we'll look at that later. So let's try and model this in Python. Now we know what we are looking at, what we are looking for. So we can say class, as our class name will be what? Student. So class student, then our parentheses, colon, and then we have instantiated the class basically. So now let's initialize some attributes and some methods of the class. How do we initialize it? So how do we initialize some attributes and methods? Well, we just simply call variables or create variables. Let's say name is equal to, let's give this, or let's just give a general name for every student, Toby. Then grade is equal to, let's put this student in grade 5, and then let's give it an age, or the student rather, an age of 16, right? Let's give it that age. Now, like I remember earlier, I said methods are simply just functions. Yeah, methods are simply just functions, but they are functions defined under a class. That's the difference. A method is simply a function that is defined under a class. So what would that look like? That simply means we'll just go under here and say define, what's our function name, go to class. So we'll say go to class, and then let's say would print let's say we want to print the person's name is going to class, so we say name, although it doesn't have access to this yet, so we have to pass it as a parameter. Name is going to class. It's as simple as that. So let's just copy this and scaffold two more methods. So these are our methods under here. So read and take an exam. So you can say we'll call this method read, I would say is reading, and then lastly we would call the final method take an exam. So we can say print is taking an exam. Okay, let's slow down. Attributes, simply things that each member of that object of that class should possess, should have. Ideally it will be unique, sometimes it might not be unique. Methods, simply things that every object or instance of that class should be able to do. So these are functions that they can implement. Now that we have successfully created our class, let's create an instance of this class. So let's say how do we do that? We simply create a variable, right? To create an object, we simply choose a variable name. So let's call this person. So this person, then you equate it to the student class. This person is a student. It's as simple as that. Now our student class, currently it's hard coded. We hard coded all these things, so every member of this class would have this, but we could make this adaptive. We could make this change depending on the student and what you supply. But for that we would use a method, a special type of method that we call a dunder init method. So just a brief overview of that. The dunder init method looks like this: def, obviously, for every method, init, and then this takes self as a parameter, right? This is what it will look like. It looks a bit weird, so I wouldn't add this will be on a separate video, but just know that if we wanted every single member or object of this class to be unique, this is what we would have to use. But for now, every single member of this class would have these three attributes. If we wanted the attributes to be unique, we would have to create that method, but this is hard coded. So now we have created a student. How do we access its methods and its attributes? So all we have to do is just call all we have to do is just write the variable. Then to access its methods and its attributes, we do dot. Then if you notice, Python instantly lists them out for us. So these are all the methods. The first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 methods and attributes are the ones available to us. So if we wanted to access an attribute, we just do dot, then the attribute name rather, which is age in this case. So you do not have to put brackets after it like you would a method. If you were to access the method, you would put brackets after, but if you were to access an attribute, it would just be the attribute name and we'll call it a day. So let's see what that looks like. Let's print it. Now since we hard coded this age value here as 16, this would be 16 regardless of any object you create. So let's see that. Beautiful, we printed it and we had 16. Likewise, if we did person dot name, we would have Toby because that's what we hard coded. Now if we did person, let's say we wanted to call a method dot, then we wanted him to go to class, so we'll do go to class. So we don't need to print it because we already have a print statement inside here, so that's like printing a print statement. Doesn't make sense. So sorry, I totally forgot that for any method to work, it needs a mandatory argument. So to create a method or rather every method within a class must have a mandatory parameter, which is called self, that is supposed to reference that particular instance. So that's probably why it wasn't working earlier. Yeah, but for every method to work, you need to pass a a compulsory argument which is called self. So every method must have that within a class, and that self simply means it's referencing that particular instance. Again, it might be a bit, it's definitely going to be a bit confusing, but just read through it and you'll probably get the hang of it. So if we run this, like you'd probably already see in my terminal, you print going to class like we defined here. So that's just a basic overview. Of course, we'll go deeper into this later. That's just a basic overview of classes in Python. If you found this helpful, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you and have a wonderful day.